Hi, I'm Bronte McInnes, and this is my multi-agent simulation of orcas and fish. This is a project that I did for my computer science class last year as the final project. Basically, it's a multi-agent simulation that represents how the pollution level of an ecosystem impacts the animals in that ecosystem, which in this case are orcas and fish. I was inspired to do this project because I'm really passionate about marine ecosystems, and when I learned about multi-agent simulations, I thought that that would be a really cool way that you could model data that you collected and kind of reach new conclusions. So I'm just going to go ahead and run it. It uses C++ and the SFML graphics library. So you enter a pollution level, and then it runs. So you have some orcas, and as you can see, the amount of animals is decreasing. Currently, orcas are increasing, and over here there are just messages about what's been happening. So basically, some of the rules of it are that when the orcas are next to fish, they eat 10 fish. When orcas are next to each other, if certain requirements are met, then they reproduce. And then, as you can see, every single time that I run this, the orcas die before the fish do, which is an interesting thing. And then it'll last for different frames, which is somewhat dependent on the amount of pollution there was in the ecosystem. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through my code. So basically, each orca that you saw represents one orca, and each fish represents 100 fish. And each one has a health at the beginning that the pollution level is subtracted from. So I used classes and parent classes. So there's an overall agent parent class, and then that allows me to have the orcas and the fish move and have many similar functions, but also some different ones. So this is how they moved. They had a random position that they could see one tile basically around them and move that much, but not off the board. And then this is change health. Their health was impacted by a few things, but basically if their health is 0, then they would die. And then this is the fish reproduction. So basically, if in order for a fish to reproduce, it would have to be every 40 frames, and as each fish represents 100 fish, they didn't have to be next to each other. It was just the fish added would be a random number between 0 and the health, divided by 2, and then minus the pollution level, so that's another way that the pollution level impacted the simulation. And then this is the orca class, and so it would start out with a random position, and then just these are things that help it behave. Same thing for fish. And then the blue background, was actually 100 or so tiles that could interact with the animals on them and interact with each other a little bit. So the squares were where some different important behaviors happened, such as fixed stacking. So when the orcas and the fish moved, they moved randomly one square, but they weren't allowed to be on top of each other. So they would move, and then it would continue going through a loop until all of the orcas and fish were on different squares. And this is something that I kind of struggled with a little bit because I was actually just missing this one simple line of code that would have fixed it. But it was basically if there was a hierarchy, so if an orca and a fish were on the same tile, the fish would be removed and the orca would be able to stay. And then each tile had an array of the animals that are on it. And so basically this array would continually get updated until it was only one animal long. And then each time it starts out with 15 fish and 4 orcas. And I found that this was a good number to make the simulation work well. So the user enters the pollution level, and then it creates the fish and the orcas. It goes through each frame, it goes through all of the orcas and sees if they've eaten the last 30 frames, because if they haven't, that's how they lose 10 health. And then it'll see if an orca ate a specific fish, and then that fish loses 10 health because 10 fish have died. So then reproduction for orcas. So orcas could reproduce if they were next to each other, and if they haven't reproduced in 50 frames, and their health also had to be above 50. So there were a lot of things that would prevent orcas from reproducing. And then overall, we'd see how many orcas we'd have to add, and then we'd add them next frame, put them in random places around the board. And then for, as I said before, fish reproduction is here. And this is moving. So as you can see, it goes through this loop until every single orca and fish are on different tiles. And then it draws them all to the screen, and it checks to see if anything's dead. So some of the things that I struggled with, some challenges that I had working on this, were that I found out that editing sprite scales doesn't work very well. So sometimes they'd be on multiple tiles, which I figured out by printing which tiles they were on, and then I just found another way to scale the sprites so that I didn't have to worry about that. And then another thing was checking if two orcas or an orca and a fish are next to each other was something that I also found difficult, because I couldn't use the .intersects function that comes with SFML, seeing as the orcas and fish wouldn't actually be touching each other. And then next I tried to check if they were on adjacent tiles, so kind of have the tiles talk to each other, but I found that didn't work very well either. So in the end, I ended up using the Pythagorean theorem with their coordinates. So if the hypotenuse is below 1.5, the orcas and fish were next to each other, and in the end I decided to include diagonals, which is why it's below 1.5. So this was a really rewarding project that I worked on, and it made me really interested in multi-agent simulations. In order to develop this idea, which I really definitely want to do, I could use research to make it more realistic and add some more rules to the environment. Originally I wanted to also include pollution is simplified in this version. I wanted it to be kind of related to runoff and algae blooms. So maybe in the future I'll do something related to that.